Every day, the world moves on as it always has. Cities wake up, work begins, and life feels familiar. But beneath that sense of normality, something is shifting. The climate is changing, and the systems we rely on, energy, food, water, cities, finance, are under pressure in ways we're only beginning to understand. These changes don't live in reports or projections, they are already shaping people, livelihoods, and communities. We created the Climate Leadership Podcast so these challenges don't remain abstract or distant, but are explored through the people working inside these systems, making real decisions with real consequences, often without clear answers. This is not a space for fear, blame, or perfection. It's a space for honest conversations about what leadership looks like in a changing world. If you're listening, you're already part of that leadership. Let's begin the conversation.
Welcome to another episode of the Climate Leadership Podcast. Sustainability has moved from the margins of business to the center of commercial decision making. What was once treated as a corporate responsibility exercise now directly influences procurement criteria, supply chain access, regulatory compliance, and long-term competitiveness. Yet many SMEs continue to approach it reactively, writing policies only when required, calculating emissions for specific tenders, and acting only when buyers raise difficult questions. So, what changes when sustainability is examined through the lens of financial leadership? A CFO does not view sustainability as a public relations exercise, but as a matter of revenue protection, risk exposure, capital allocation, operational efficiency, and strategic positioning. The conversation shifts from obligation to opportunity. Joining us today is Mr. Gary Brown, former CFO with over 30 years of financial leadership experience, and now a net zero consultant for SMEs, to explore what sustainability looks like when finance leads the strategy. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Amber.
Yes. So as we start our conversation, I would request you to please give a brief introduction about yourself.
Okay, briefly, I've been, as you said, I have over 30 years within the finance leadership roles in various large businesses, and after spending 15 years in my last role, I saw sustainability coming in and a requirement, and thought, well, I'd like to now start working and helping the local industry in the SMEs and bring sustainability into their business. And that's where it is and where I am at the moment, working with businesses to help them bring sustainability into it.
Perfect. Yeah. So to begin, you have spent more than 3 decades in finance leadership roles. What prompted you to shift from CFO to advising SMEs on sustainability strategy?
So during my many years in those financial leadership roles, and particularly towards the latter end of being in the roles, I noticed that there was a pattern where businesses were making strategic decisions about sustainability, but were not involving finance in the early stages. Mm-hmm. And it was often handled by the marketing and the compliance teams. So it was really just being treated as a policy exercise rather than a commercial strategy. But when you look at what's driving sustainability today and going back 5-6 years as well, the procurement requirements, the supply chain expectations, the regulatory pressure, and even investor scrutiny, these are fundamentally financial and strategic issues. So I thought, I'm going to move into advising SMEs because many smaller businesses are about to face those same pressures that the bigger corporates have been dealing with for a number of years. But the difference with the SMEs is that they don't usually have internal sustainability teams. Mm-hmm. And it's left with a PA or a receptionist or something to have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. But what they do have is a leadership teams who are trying to grow their business, protect their revenue, and win contracts and ultimately manage risk and control costs. And that's where the CFO perspective becomes incredibly valuable.
I see. I see. So I was just thinking, Gary, like you have had a very big and long career. When was the time when, according to you, sustainability started picking up pace and you heard about this during your career?
It was probably about 10 years ago, when the company I was working for at that stage had decided, their shareholders had decided they needed to move onto the ISO 14000, which is the environmental ISO.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key things which we said there is if to be within that, we need to be sustainable and reduce our carbon emissions. Because ultimately that's what is causing the thing, because the environment came in, and that's where it came in. And the first thing we did was in actual fact invest in changing all our sites into having LED lighting, and that by itself saved an incredible amount of, apart from costs, we reduced the cost dramatically, but our carbon footprint dropped incredibly, and that's where I saw it coming in. And it took a while before they involved the finance people in, and initially it was everyone else talking about it, but not many people involved the finance. And it was only right at the end when they said, well, how much is this going to cost us and what's it going to be? And they suddenly said, oh, we'll bring the finance team in at the end. And that's when I thought, no, this needs to change. You need the finance team in up front.
Right. Okay, so from your perspective, what is the fundamental difference between traditional sustainability approach and what you would call a CFO's approach to sustainability?
To me, the traditional CFO, traditional sustainability is often just focusing on reporting and reputation.
Mm-hmm.
So the questions that the teams then ask is, what policies do we have? What emission numbers do we have to report, or can we report? How does our sustainability story look externally? What is the outside world looking at us at?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the CFO's approach is slightly different, in that we are asking, well, if we don't go with sustainability, what revenues are we going to lose? Because we can't complete those sustainability requirements. What buyers are asking for emissions data, but why? What are they looking for? What is that supposed to help them with? Where would the regulation, in the supply chain to disrupt, which could land up disrupting our business?
Mm-hmm.
And where are the what are the operational efficiencies that we're missing now, which we could be improving on just by bringing sustainability in? So in other words, a CFO treats sustainability as a business risk and growth strategy, and not just a communications exercise.
Okay, I see. So many SMEs still treat sustainability as a cost center. Why does that mindset still persist, and what changes happen when sustainability is reframed as a driver of revenue and risk management?
So there are two main reasons. First, sustainability has historically been presented just as a compliance exercise. You need to do this, that's it. It's pure compliance, something businesses must do because the regulators or even the activists are expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that many SMEs only encounter sustainability when a customer suddenly asks for what's your carbon footprint or what's your net zero commitment. And at that point, it feels like a cost, because now the request arrives unexpectedly. And they have to say, whoa, what are we going to have to bring in? Where do we need to get people to help us do it and pay that? And it could just be a cost of management time. Doesn't necessarily have to be a financial cost.
Mm-hmm.
But when sustainability is planned strategically, the whole picture changes. And it can protect access to contracts, which you have already, or to make sure that you keep those contracts. Reduce your energy and your resource costs.
Mm-hmm.
Improve your supply chain reliance, and strengthen any competitive positioning. Mm-hmm. So the shift is moving from being a reactive compliance to a proactive strategy.
Right. So I'm just thinking, so suppose I'm a founder and I'm founding a business.
Yeah.
I'm solving a problem.
Right.
So 10 years ago, maybe, I might not think of sustainability as in the first few problems to solve, because I'm trying to build a product, push it to the people, get some revenue out of it. But now that process is changing. Sustainability is getting included into that.
Yeah.
So do you think still founders think proactively about sustainability, or is still the backside of it?
I think it is still the backside, and one of the things which is coming out, and that's what I'm finding when I'm talking to some founders of SMEs. However, it also depends on who they are trying to be selling within their products or services. Mm-hmm. If they're trying to sell into large businesses, they would find that they'll have to bring sustainability to the forefront. Whereas if they're just selling to the consumer who is quite happy with the resource and is not going to question them about sustainability, they might leave it in the back. But ultimately, it's going to have to come into their business. It depends on, to me, I see it as depends on who their clients are ultimately as to where they're going to be putting that within their business.
Okay, I see. So procurement requirements are becoming more demanding. How directly are sustainability credentials now influencing tender outcomes and contract renewals?
To me, that's very direct, that it's influencing it very directly. The large organizations have already for the last couple of years had a net zero commitments, which they've committed that they're going to be ending, being net zero by 2050 or 2045, depending on what each company is. And they cannot achieve those goals without reducing the emissions across their supply chain. And that means procurement teams are now asking suppliers questions like, do you measure your emissions? Do you have a carbon reduction plan? Do you have credible targets? Mm-hmm. And these requirements are increasingly appearing in tender scoring systems. So as an example, if two suppliers are selling something similar, with the pricing similar and the quality similar, the one with the most credible sustainability data is the one who's going to win the contract. And the last thing you want to be is the one who doesn't have that credible sustainability data. And coming back to your last question, when you start a business, are you going to be needing that to be able to put in your tenders? So for SME, to me, I see it's a revenue protection issue rather than just a reporting exercise.
Mm-hmm. So what I understand is sustainability is becoming as a strategic advantage, a competitive advantage for businesses to have. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. Without a doubt.
Okay. So when buyers request emissions data or net zero commitments, what does credible and commercially meaningful reporting looks like from a financial governance standpoint?
We go back to asking part of your question is what is a credible reporting? And to me, it's got three characteristics. So the first is that the data has to be accurate and explainable. In other words, if someone asks, where did that number come from? The business should be able to show the calculation and the source. A simple example could be electricity use. Instead of estimating emissions, a company could be taking the actual electricity consumption from the utility bills, apply a recognized emission factor to calculate their carbon footprint. And that's what makes data credible. It's traceable back to the real operational data. It's not guesswork. Mm-hmm. The second characteristic is that it should be useful for decision making and not just for reporting. So many companies measure emissions simply because a customer asked for it. But the real value comes when the data reveals where inefficiencies exist within the business. An example of use an example of a company calculates its emissions and discovers that 70% of the footprint comes from the diesel used in the vehicle fleet. Mm-hmm. The insight immediately highlights where improvements can take. An example there is UPS they started doing things and they've reduced theirs dramatically. They did route optimization. They switched to more efficient vehicles. They reduced unnecessary journeys. So ultimately, the carbon data becomes a management tool, not just a report that sits in a folder or a file or the bottom drawer or something like that. The third characteristic to me is governance, meaning that the process is built into how the business operates. So in finance, we wouldn't calculate our revenue or our sales once and never look back at it again. We have systems and controls and accountability around financial reporting. So sustainable data needs something similar. So, for example, a company might, appoint somebody who will do the emissions tracking. A specific manager will do the emissions tracking. They'll review the numbers on a quarterly basis and include those numbers and those targets in their regular management meetings, whether that's monthly, quarterly, half yearly, whenever they have that it becomes part of the management. And where there's a board of directors, it should be a key item on every board of directors' agenda. So when it's managed in this way, it becomes part of normal business discipline, rather than a last-minute exercise when the tender appears. So in many ways, good business, good sustainability reporting should look very similar to good financial reporting. Now, the numbers should be accurate. They should help management make decisions. And there should be clear governance around how they're tracked and improved.
Right. So, Gary, I have two simple, short questions. First one was about net zero commitments, right? So companies can say 2050 will be net zero. But who is asking them or checking with them? When will they be 50%, 60%, next 5 years, next 10 years? Is because you can give a lot of time. You can say by 2100, 2100, I'll be something, right?
At the moment, it's only for the large businesses who are required to do the reporting. They have to actually put it as part of and particularly the listed companies, they have to put it in their financial statement. So within that, there would be reports where they've done it. And that's where it's going to flow down, because ultimately the net zero of 2050 is all comes from the Paris Agreement in 2015, where all the countries have signed up for it. So that's where it is. I think where it'll be coming from us as the SMEs having to do that is when the supplier, our customers, are asking that question. And they're going to say, well, if you can't do it before 2050, you're going to harm my commitment, which I have. Right. So maybe I'm going to change my supplier, and you could lose a contract because you're not prepared to do that commitment.
Right. Okay. And the second question was about credibility. So with the incoming of AI, artificial intelligence, a lot of time we search information with AI. And if some SME shares that data, they need to have this credible sourcing. So is it becoming difficult for someone reviewing this data to understand which is the right one, which is not the right data?
I would guess it, because you're quite right. AI could be confusing it, but now it all comes to credibility as to the person supplying the data. Coming back to my last to one of the questions is have you got evidence that is your genuine data, rather than, oh, hang on, I've gone and done this and I've just written an AI query. What should I be? This is my type of business. That it will end up being as people get to learn how AI is writing reports, that it'll end up being picked up that it's not genuine.
Right.
It's the same as if I'm preparing a set of financial statements for a company, and it has to be audited, whether it's audited or whether I submit it on Companies House, it has to be accurate and correct. It would be very questionable if I'm doing that and I'm giving some garbage and rubbish. You will be caught out eventually.
Yes. Perfect. So you often speak about mapping businesses against what buyers and regulators will expect in the next 12 to 36 months. What major shifts do you see coming that SMEs are currently underestimating?
I see there being three big shifts. The first is supply chain transparency. As I was saying, large companies will gradually require more emissions data from the suppliers, because their scope 3 emissions often represent most of their carbon footprint. And looking at a number of reports and a number of factors in companies I've been working with, it's an 80% to 20% is coming from scope 3. So that is where they're going to be looking predominantly to reduce their carbon footprints. The second one is procurement scoring. So sustainability will increasingly influence whether a company can qualify for tenders. And an example there is I have a small company which is a small IT company, and they work with an NHS affiliate, and the NHS has come to them and said to them, well, we need your, if you want to continue working with us with your IT supplies, we needing your carbon reduction plan, your net zero plan. And he works from home. It's a three-man business, and that's already starting to hit. So that's what's going to happen, the procurement score. And the third is regulatory pressure. So disclosure expectations, or they're increasing globally. And how many SMEs will, and many SMEs we're going to feel the pressure of having to answer to and provide reporting to the customers. So the key issue is that many SMEs underestimate how quickly these expectations are cascading down the supply chains.
Right. So, Gary, I was just thinking that as governments, they want their SMEs or startups to feel less burdened, so they can work on the technology, the latest innovation and stuff like that. But if sustainability pushes them behind, then isn't this a counterintuitive to startup ecosystem? What do you think about that?
Yes, that could be. But there could also be opportunities for businesses who are entrepreneurs and for startups, that they actually are taking that into consideration, changing and starting up a company which is aimed at sustainability and bringing the rest along. So it can work both ways. But yes, there could be issues where companies are going to just fold because they can't cover the sustainability side.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think it's a two-edged sword, and
exactly
anything can happen.
Exactly.
Okay. So moving forward, capital allocation is always a sensitive topic for SMEs. How should leaders evaluate sustainability investment without putting short-term cash flow under strain?
And this is where I come, where I say that the CFO or the finance director or finance team's mindset is very essential. Not every sustainability initiative requires a large capital investment. Often the biggest opportunities are from operational improvements, just energy efficiency, turning the lights off at night, changing your bulbs to LEDs, turning the equipment off at night, your computers, the big machinery in the factory, turning that off. It's, being more efficient. Mm-hmm. Looking at waste reduction, coming to an agreement with your suppliers that you will return any packaging so that they can reuse it when they supply the next lot to you, that type of thing. Just logistics optimization, as I said, an example of the UPS, and looking at all your own suppliers to see, well, who actually is the better one to supply with regards to the sustainability. Mm-hmm. So these ones will reduce costs while lowering emissions. But when it gets to capital equipment and investment, and I think that's where there's a lot of concern that people, the SMEs have, is that it's going to be big capital investments. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't have to happen immediately, but every capital investment, whether it is for sustainability or not, it should be treated all the same. So sustainability ones should be treated the same way. And then you're looking back at your payback period, how much operational savings you're going to do, any risk mitigation, and how it's going to protect your revenue. And the goal is to ultimately prioritize the initiatives to deliver both financial and environmental returns.
Right. Yeah, we should not just put money just for environment, because it's a business. It's an entity which needs to run, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So an example I'll use with that is So at the moment, you're running, as business could be running 3 or 4 vehicles, and they're all diesel or petrol. And you've decided that your net zero is going to be in 15 years' time or whatever time period. Your commitment is only, well, I'll replace my vehicles when they are due for replacement, and I'll replace them with a more efficient vehicle. You don't need to commit to that all up front. It's all as, do it at the time when the requirement is. So.
Right. Makes sense, yeah. Instead of when the time comes, we'll change, and that will impact, right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So can you share example where sustainability initiatives have directly improved operational efficiency, reduce waste, or strengthen margins?
Actually, it's a very interesting question. And some examples. I'm actually the examples I'm going to come is from the other way. And I'm going to say that that effective sustainability, it's simply just good operational management. And I'll take some examples that I've gone and got, that I know of, that are available in the public and the big listed companies. Particularly, I've used the UK companies that they well know. And you take Marks and Spencer's. So they've had a long-running sustainability program called Plan A. And that plan was where they focused on practical changes inside their stores. Things like better refrigeration systems, more efficient lighting, smarter energy management. And the result wasn't just that they had lower emissions. It reduced the energy use in their stores by approximately 34% per square foot, saving the business roughly £22 million in energy costs. Sainsbury's, similar to what M&S did, but they worked with the Carbon Trust to improve their energy efficiency across their stores. And the simple operational changes that they did cut energy use by 15%, saving around £9 million a year. And there's just a great example of how sustainability often starts with better operational disciplines. Another one, good example, but more to do with logistics, is the cooperative group. So they redesigned some parts of their supply chain, where they reduced using empty truck journeys, which I'm sure all logistics firm has, and they started some of their freight movement from road to rail and improved vehicle efficiency. I think those changes just reduced fuel consumption by about 29% and cut their supply chain emissions by 31%. So what's interesting about these 3 examples is that none of them started with a climate objective.
Yes.
They all started with operational efficiency. So the energy use, logistics, and waste. So the emissions reductions were almost a byproduct of running a business a lot better. And that's why I often say good sustainability is usually just good business management with the waste taken out.
Right. So, Gary, with that statement, do you say every business is not efficient? They can improve always.
There's always areas of improving efficiency. No matter what there is always areas, and they could be small, could be a couple of pounds, could be a couple of pence, but there is always ways of looking at getting rid of the waste cost, just looking at the waste.
Right. Okay, so for SME boards and leadership teams, what role should the CFO play in embedding sustainability into core business strategy rather than leaving it as a standalone initiative?
So I think, as I said a bit earlier, that the CFO plays a critical role because sustainability ultimately affects both the revenue, the cost structures, the capital investments, and any risk exposure. So the CFO is there to ensure sustainability is integrated into strategic planning, the budgeting, or performance management, risk management. And if you think about it, without financial leadership, sustainability can become disconnected from commercial reality and just become a marketing and advertising thing.
Yeah.
Whereas with financial leadership, it becomes a structured, measurable business strategy.
Right. I think if there is no finance and if there is only marketing, then I think that's more like greenwashing because you're not really putting money where it needs to be.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest things which we haven't dealt with here, but greenwashing is one of the biggest scary things that's out there, which is very difficult to find, to always pick up.
Right. Okay. So looking ahead 5 to 10 years from today, do you see sustainability becoming fully integrated into mainstream financial reporting and strategic planning? What will separate the companies that adapt early from those that lag behind?
So I think the companies that will succeed will do three things well. And as you gathered, I love doing things in threes. The first one thing that they'll do well is they'll build credible data systems for measuring and managing their emissions.
Mhm.
The second thing that they're going to do is they're going to integrate sustainability into their business strategy rather than dealing with it as a standalone initiative, because that doesn't work. And the third thing that they're going to do is recognize that sustainability is increasingly linked to market access and competitiveness. Competitiveness, if you don't have a sustainable practice, you're not going to be able to land those projects. And so what we're really seeing is sustainability is moving from the margins of business to the core of how companies operate. And I think in the next decade, sustainability won't be a separate strategy. It'll become quite simply how well a business is run and how well it operates.
Right, Gary. So what I'm just thinking after this conversation is that moving forward, the companies that can integrate sustainability into their core strategy much better will have an advantage over the other competitors. Would that be right thing to say?
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely.
Okay. And this will be driven by good data, which you said.
Yeah, it will be driven by good data. Well, good data is there to prove that it's actually working and that that's happened.
Yeah, which is very important because suppose today a company says, I did so much things, but I don't know. As a consumer, I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're doing it or not.
Well, that's the next thing which will probably come in the future. And I have heard rumors that there are teams who are looking. There is an initiative. Is that like we have large companies have to be audited by auditors? There could be things that in the future your sustainability reports, your ESG reports, are going to have to be audited by somebody, and that who knows when that will happen. But yeah, it's not there at the moment as a requirement.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. So thank you, Gary, for such a clear and commercially grounded conversation. Today's discussion makes one thing evident, that sustainability is no longer a secondary initiative or a reporting task completed under pressure. It is increasingly shaping contract eligibility, supply chain resilience, regulatory readiness, and long-term financial performance. When sustainability is approached from a CFO's perspective, the focus becomes disciplined and strategic. It is about protecting revenue, managing risk, allocating capital responsibly, and building credible systems that stand up to buyer scrutiny. It requires measurable data, structured planning, and alignment with core business objectives. Sustainability is no longer just an environmental conversation, it is a financial strategy. Thank you for joining us on the Climate Leadership Podcast. We will be back soon with more conversations exploring the intersection of climate, finance, and leadership. Until then, take care and have a nice day. Bye-bye.